The clock on Abigail's bedroom wall ticked away, marking another sleepless night. Moonlight streamed through the half-drawn curtains, illuminating the small desk where she sat hunched over her laptop. Her fingers moved rhythmically across the keyboard, the soft tapping a comforting melody in the otherwise silent room. At 32, she had grown accustomed to these quiet hours, when the world slept and she could finally breathe. From the bedroom next door came a gentle cough. Abigail's fingers froze mid-sentence. She tilted her head, listening intently until the sound subsided. Sliding her chair back, she padded softly to the adjacent room, where her 5-year-old daughter Lily slept peacefully, her blonde curls splayed across the pillow. Abigail adjusted the blanket that had slipped off her daughter's shoulders, her hand lingering to stroke the child's warm cheek. Lily was her world, her reason for persevering through everything. Returning to her desk, Abigail glanced at the framed photo beside her laptop, a faded image of an older couple standing beside a much younger version of herself on her high school graduation day. Thomas and Martha Green, her adoptive parents. They stood stiff and formal in the photo, their hands resting politely on her shoulders. Even then, there had been a distance between them that no amount of time or effort on Abigail's part had been able to bridge. She sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. The freelance article she was working on was due by morning, and her client was one of the few who paid well and on time. As a single mother with mounting bills, she couldn't afford to miss deadlines. Lily's preschool tuition alone consumed nearly half her monthly income, but Abigail was determined to give her daughter the best education possible. It was worth every sacrifice. The phone on her desk vibrated, startling her. Who would call at this hour? A chill ran down her spine as she recognized the number, her adoptive brother Michael's. They rarely spoke these days, not since the disastrous Christmas dinner 3 years ago when Martha had made it abundantly clear where Abigail stood in the family hierarchy. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Abby," Michael's voice sounded strained. "It's Dad. He had a heart attack. He's gone." The Green family home looked exactly as Abigail remembered it: imposing, pristine, and utterly unwelcoming. The Tudor-style mansion sat on 2 acres in Westchester County, its manicured lawn and sculptured hedges a testament to Martha's obsession with appearances. As Abigail pulled her weathered Honda into the circular driveway, she couldn't help but notice how out of place it looked among the luxury vehicles parked ahead: Michael's Audi, her sister Sophia's Mercedes, and several other expensive cars belonging to extended family members she barely knew. Lily squirmed in her car seat. "Mommy, is this where Grandpa lived?" Abigail nodded, forcing a smile as she helped her daughter out of the car. "Yes, sweetheart. This is where I grew up too. It's so big." Lily's eyes widened as she took in the massive house. "Come on, let's go inside." Abigail took her daughter's hand, feeling a familiar knot form in her stomach. It had been 3 years since she'd set foot in this house, since the night Martha had had too much wine and decided to remind everyone at the Christmas dinner table that Abigail wasn't really a Green and therefore shouldn't expect the same inheritance as her real children. The front door opened before Abigail could ring the bell. Martha stood in the entryway, impeccably dressed in a black designer suit, despite her husband's death just 2 days prior. Her gray hair was pulled into a tight chignon, not a strand out of place. Her lips thinned as her gaze fell on Abigail, then moved to Lily. "You brought the child," she said, her tone making it clear she disapproved. "Hello to you too, Martha," Abigail replied evenly. "I'm sorry about Thomas." Martha stepped aside to let them enter. "Everyone's in the living room. Michael and Sophia have been handling the funeral arrangements." Abigail understood the implication: she hadn't been needed or consulted. As always, she was an afterthought, if thought of at all. She guided Lily through the grand foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier, past the formal dining room where that fateful Christmas argument had erupted, and into the spacious living room where somber-faced relatives gathered in small clusters. Sophia spotted her first. Unlike Martha, who at least attempted to maintain a veneer of civility, Sophia had never hidden her resentment toward her adopted sister. At 35, she was the spitting image of Martha, tall, thin, with sharp features and calculating eyes. She broke away from her conversation with a cousin and approached, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "I'm surprised you came," she said, barely acknowledging Lily with a cursory glance. "He was my father too, Sophia," Abigail replied quietly, tightening her grip on Lily's hand. Sophia laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Right. That's what you keep saying." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Just so you know, Dad made some changes to his will in the last few months. Don't get your hopes up about inheriting anything substantial." Before Abigail could respond, Michael approached, giving her a brief, awkward hug. Unlike Sophia and Martha, he had occasionally reached out over the years, sending birthday cards to Lily and checking in during holidays. He wasn't exactly warm, but he wasn't cruel either. "Glad you could make it, Abby," he said, bending down to greet Lily. "Hey there, kiddo. You've grown since I last saw you." Lily hid partially behind Abigail's leg, suddenly shy. "Hello, Uncle Michael." "The service is tomorrow at St. Andrew's," Michael informed Abigail. 10 o'clock. Mom wanted something small and dignified. Of course, Abigail nodded. What Martha wanted, Martha got. It had always been that way. Throughout the afternoon, Abigail felt the weight of judging eyes following her. Relatives she barely knew whispered behind cupped hands as she passed. She caught fragments, the adopted one, and single mother, and such a shame. She found refuge in the kitchen, helping the caterers arrange finger sandwiches and pour coffee for guests. It was easier than attempting to participate in conversations where she clearly wasn't welcome. Lily sat at the kitchen island, coloring in a book Abigail had brought along, occasionally asking innocent questions about the large house and the people in it. "Mommy, why does that lady keep looking at us like we did something wrong?" Lily whispered after Martha had passed through the kitchen, casting a disapproving glance their way. Abigail's heart tightened. "Some people just have a hard time showing their feelings, sweetheart. Especially when they're sad." The kitchen door swung open, and a tall man in a charcoal suit entered. He paused when he saw Abigail, his eyes registering surprise, then something else she couldn't quite decipher. "Excuse me," he said. "I was looking for somewhere quiet to make a call." "The study would be better," Abigail suggested. "Down the hall, third door on the left. This place is about to get busy with dinner preparations." He nodded, then hesitated. "You're Abigail, aren't you?" She looked up, surprised he knew her name. "Yes, I'm Nolan Blackwood. I was Thomas's attorney. And friend." He extended his hand, which she shook briefly. "I'm sorry for your loss." There was a sincerity in his voice that caught her off guard. In this house full of people who barely acknowledged her grief, his simple words felt like a lifeline. "Thank you," she replied softly. His gaze moved to Lily, who was watching their interaction curiously. "And who's this young artist?" "I'm Lily," her daughter answered before Abigail could. "I'm 5.5. Nolan smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. 5.5 is a very important age. Those are some beautiful flowers you're drawing." Lily beamed at the compliment, immediately warming to him. "They're for my grandpa. Mommy said he went to heaven." A shadow crossed Nolan's face. "That's very thoughtful of you." He turned back to Abigail. "I'll be handling the reading of the will after the funeral. I just wanted to let you know personally that your presence is requested." Before she could respond, the kitchen door swung open again, and Sophia entered, stopping short when she saw them talking. "Nolan, Mom's looking for you," she said, her tone laced with suspicion as she glanced between them. "Something about Dad's collection." Of course, he nodded, then turned back to Abigail. It was nice meeting you both. With a final smile at Lily, he left, Sophia trailing after him with a backward glance that spoke volumes about her distrust. St. Andrew's Episcopal Church was filled to capacity the following morning. Thomas Green had been a prominent figure in the community, a successful investment banker, a generous donor to local charities, a pillar of society. Rows of dark-suited men and black-clad women filled the pews, many of whom Abigail recognized from her childhood as her father's business associates and golf club friends. She sat in the second row with Lily beside her, acutely aware of the physical distance Martha had deliberately placed between them and the rest of the immediate family. Michael sat with his wife Claire on the opposite end of the pew, while Martha and Sophia occupied the front row alongside Thomas's brother and his wife. The service was exactly as Thomas would have wanted it: dignified, traditional, and mercifully brief. The minister spoke of his dedication to family, his business acumen, and his charitable contributions. Not once did he mention Thomas's adoption of a 4-year-old girl 28 years ago, or the fact that he had a granddaughter. It was as if that part of his life had been erased from the official narrative. As the choir sang the final hymn, Abigail felt a tear slide down her cheek. Despite everything, Thomas had been the father she knew. He might not have been demonstrative with his affection, but there had been moments helping her with math homework, teaching her to drive, his rare nod of approval when she graduated college with honors. Small gestures that she had clung to over the years. After the service, the family gathered at the Green Mansion for the reading of the will. Martha had arranged for a neighbor to take Lily for a few hours, making it clear that children were not welcome at such proceedings. Abigail reluctantly agreed, knowing it was better for Lily not to witness whatever family drama might unfold. The Green family attorney, Nolan Blackwood, set up in Thomas's study a wood-paneled room dominated by a massive oak desk and walls of leather-bound books. Abigail had always loved this room as a child. It smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, and sometimes, on rare occasions, Thomas would allow her to sit quietly and read while he worked. Martha took the seat directly opposite Nolan, with Sophia and Michael flanking her. Abigail chose a chair slightly apart from them, feeling like an outsider as always. "Thank you all for being here," Nolan began, his professional demeanor firmly in place. "I know this is a difficult time." He opened a leather folder and extracted several documents. "I'll try to keep this as straightforward as possible." Thomas was very specific about his wishes. Abigail braced herself, remembering Sophia's warning about the changes to the will. She hadn't come expecting anything substantial. Whatever small inheritance she might have received would help with Lily's education fund, but she had long ago accepted that she would need to make her own way in the world. Nolan began reading the legal preamble, his voice steady and clear. Martha sat ramrod straight, her hands folded in her lap. Sophia couldn't quite hide her anticipation, while Michael stared at the floor, his expression unreadable. "To my wife, Martha, I leave our primary residence and its contents, as well as our vacation home in the Hamptons," Nolan read. Martha nodded slightly, as if this was exactly what she expected. "To my son, Michael, I leave my shares in Green Financial Group and my collection of rare watches." Michael looked up, surprised. The shares in the company were worth millions. "To my daughter, Sophia, I leave my investment portfolio and the sum of $2 million. Sophia smiled smugly, shooting a triumphant glance at Abigail. Nolan paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. "And to my daughter, Abigail Green." "Adopted daughter," Martha corrected sharply. Nolan looked at her, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "As I was saying," he continued deliberately, "to my daughter, Abigail Green, I leave my personal library and the contents of Safety Deposit Box 247 at First National Bank." Sophia laughed, not bothering to disguise her satisfaction. "Books." How fitting. Abigail kept her face carefully neutral. The library was actually a thoughtful bequest. Thomas knew how much she loved to read. The safety deposit box, however, was a mystery. Additionally, Nolan continued, and something in his tone made everyone in the room go still. I established a trust fund in the amount of $5 million for my granddaughter, Lily Green, to be managed by her mother, Abigail, until Lily reaches the age of 25. The silence that followed was absolute. Martha's face went white with shock. Sophia half rose from her chair. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "Dad would never." "I assure you, it's all perfectly legal and witnessed," Nolan cut in smoothly. Furthermore, Thomas requested that a letter be read at this time. He removed an envelope from his folder and broke the seal. "If this letter is being read, then I have passed without having the courage to set things right in person, something for which I am deeply ashamed," Nolan read Thomas's words. "For too many years, I allowed my wife's prejudice to dictate my relationship with my daughter Abigail. I failed to stand up for her, to protect her from the subtle and not so subtle cruelties inflicted upon her in her home. I failed as a father." Martha made a choking sound. Michael looked up sharply, his eyes wide. "Abigail was never treated as an equal member of this family, despite my legal and moral obligation to do so. When she became a single mother, rather than offering support as we should have, we further isolated her. I can never make up for those years of neglect, but I hope that by providing for my granddaughter, I can offer some small measure of atonement." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, but she blinked them back, determined not to break down in front of Martha and Sophia. "To Martha, Michael, and Sophia, I ask that you reflect on your behavior and consider what true family means. Blood is far less important than love and acceptance, a lesson I learned too late." Nolan folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. "That concludes the formal reading of the will. There are additional documents that require signatures, which we can address individually." Martha stood abruptly. "This is preposterous. Thomas wasn't in his right mind when he made these changes. We'll contest it." Nolan smiled thinly. "You're welcome to try, Mrs. Green, but I can assure you that Thomas was of sound mind and body when he revised his will 6 months ago. I have medical affidavits and multiple witnesses to that effect." "6 months ago?" Sophia echoed. That's when she stopped suddenly, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Abigail. "When what, Sophia?" Abigail asked quietly. "When you must have contacted him behind our backs," Sophia accused. "What did you do? Play the poor single mother card? Manipulate him with guilt in his old age?" Something inside Abigail snapped. Years of enduring their cruelty, of turning the other cheek, of protecting Lily from knowing how her own family rejected her, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. She reached into her purse and pulled out a single folded piece of paper, placing it on the desk between them. "I had nothing to do with Thomas's decision," she said calmly. "But this might have." Nolan looked at the paper, then back at Abigail, a question in his eyes. She nodded, giving him permission to read it. He unfolded the paper and scanned it briefly. "This appears to be the results of a DNA test," he said. Martha sank back into her chair. "What nonsense is this now?" "Last year, I did one of those ancestry tests," Abigail explained, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I was curious about my biological family. I never expected the results to show a close relative match." She looked directly at Martha. Specifically, a paternal half-sister match. The color drained from Martha's face. "I'm not adopted," Abigail continued. "I'm Thomas's biological daughter from a relationship he had before he married you, Martha. He knew my mother briefly in college. When she died of cancer when I was 4, he took me in. But instead of telling you the truth, he invented the adoption story." Michael stared at her in disbelief. "That's not possible." "It is possible, and it's true," Nolan interjected quietly. Thomas confirmed it to me himself when he changed his will. Sophia shook her head frantically. No, no, you're lying. Both of you. Abigail continued. I showed Thomas the DNA results 6 months ago. I didn't ask for anything, I just thought he deserved to know that I had discovered the truth. I never expected him to change his will. You expect us to believe that? Martha's voice was barely audible, her composure finally cracking. That for 28 years, my husband lied to me about who you really were? I don't particularly care what you believe anymore, Martha, Abigail replied, gathering her purse and standing. I've spent my entire life trying to earn a place in this family, and it was never enough. I'm done trying. She looked at each of them in turn. Thomas made his peace with the truth. It's up to you to do the same. With that, she turned and walked out of the study, feeling lighter than she had in years. In the grand foyer, Abigail paused, taking a deep breath. Through the window, she could see her neighbor's car pulling into the driveway, returning with Lily. Despite everything that had just happened, she smiled. Lily was what mattered now. The study door opened behind her, and she turned to see Nolan emerging, holding a small brass key. For the safety deposit box, he explained, handing it to her. Thomas asked me to give you this privately. She accepted it, their fingertips brushing briefly. Thank you for everything. He hesitated, then said, he talked about you often, you know. Especially this past year. He was proud of you, how you've raised Lily on your own, how you've built a life despite the obstacles. A lump formed in Abigail's throat. I wish he had told me that himself. Some men find it easier to express their feelings on paper than in person, Nolan replied gently. The contents of that safety deposit box might give you the closure you're looking for. The front door burst open, and Lily bounded in, her face lighting up when she saw her mother. Mommy, Mrs. Peterson has 3 cats and she let me play with all of them. Abigail knelt down, gathering her daughter in a tight hug. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. We should probably go, she said, rising to her feet and taking Lily's hand. Thank you again, Nolan. He smiled, his eyes warm. If you need any legal help navigating the trust fund or anything else, please don't hesitate to call me. He handed her his business card. My personal number is on the back. As they walked to her car, Lily chattering happily about her adventure with the neighbor's cats, Abigail felt a curious sense of peace. The truth was finally out, and while it hadn't magically repaired her relationship with the Greens, it had freed her from the burden of seeking their approval. Are we going home now? Lily asked as Abigail helped her into her car seat. Not yet, Abigail decided. I think we'll make a quick stop at the bank first. 1 year later. Abigail stood in the doorway of her new office, admiring the freshly painted walls and the large window overlooking downtown. The sign on the door read Abigail Green Literary Agency, a dream she had nurtured for years, but never had the capital to pursue. The safety deposit box had contained more than just Thomas's written confession and apology. There had been photographs of her mother that she had never seen before, letters they had exchanged during their brief relationship, and a substantial amount of cash that Thomas had apparently been saving for her over the years without Martha's knowledge. But more valuable than any of that had been the journal Thomas's private thoughts spanning the 28 years since he had brought Abigail home. His initial fear of Martha discovering the truth. His growing attachment to the little girl with her mother's eyes. His profound regret at allowing Martha's jealousy and insecurity to create a wall between them. And in the final entries, his determination to make things right, even if only after his death. It hadn't erased the years of feeling unwanted, but it had helped her understand and ultimately forgive. The website just went live, announced a voice behind her. Nolan stood in the reception area, his suit jacket draped over his arm, his tie loosened after a long day in court. Over the past year, their professional relationship had slowly evolved into something deeper. He had helped her navigate the complexities of Lily's trust fund, advised her on opening her literary agency, and somewhere along the way, become an important part of both her and Lily's lives. "And I just signed my third client," Abigail replied with a smile. "A promising new novelist." "Sounds like a celebration is in order," he suggested, crossing the room to stand beside her. "Lily's been asking to try that new ice cream place near the playground." Abigail laughed. "Ice cream before dinner? You're spoiling her." "Special occasions call for broken rules," he countered, slipping his arm around her waist. As they locked up the office and headed to pick up Lily from her after-school program, Abigail reflected on how much had changed in a year. Martha had indeed contested the will, but quickly backed down when faced with the overwhelming evidence and the risk of public scandal. Michael, to everyone's surprise, had reached out a few months later, awkwardly attempting to rebuild a relationship with the half-sister he'd never truly known. Sophia remained distant, but Abigail found she no longer cared about gaining her approval. Lily skipped ahead of them on the sidewalk, her backpack bouncing as she pointed out a butterfly fluttering near a flower bed. She had flourished this past year, excelling in school, making new friends, blossoming in the stable, loving environment Abigail had worked so hard to create. "Penny for your thoughts?" Nolan asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Abigail squeezed his hand. "I was just thinking about how sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most unexpected blessings." Up ahead, Lily turned and waved impatiently for them to catch up, the afternoon sun illuminating her smile, the same smile Abigail had seen in those photographs of her mother, the same smile she now recognized in her own reflection. The truth had finally set them all free, allowing new bonds to form and genuine love to take root where pretense once ruled. As they joined Lily on their way to celebrate another small victory in their new life together, Abigail knew that she had finally found what she'd been searching for all along: not the approval of people who couldn't love her, but the courage to create a family defined by love rather than obligation. And that, more than any inheritance, was Thomas Green's true legacy.